The continent is where most The Witcher takes place. Pretty convenient, but that is only because no one has dared venture through the vast seas to the west, the Dragon Mountains block off exploration to the north, and the further south you go, the more danger you're generally in. Also, to the east has multiple mountain ranges, and it's where humans push the other races, so you probably don't want to go there either. When talking about the continent, it's generally broken into two main groups: the Northern Kingdoms and the Nilfgaard Empire. My goal is to go through all the kingdoms to give you more lore on this amazing world. So this video, I want to focus on one of the Northern Kingdoms. Well, one of the lesser Northern Kingdoms, as the four great ones are Redania, Cadwyn, Temeria, and Edirn. So this video, let's talk about Kovir and Poviss. Kovir and Poviss are located south of the Dragon Mountains, on the North Sea, north of the Gulf of Praxida, and northwest of Redania. This region, being right up against the Dragon Mountains, has an abundance of minerals and riches. However, that wasn't always known and is actually how this kingdom was formed. It is joked that Kovir only has two seasons, winter and summer, and you know it's summer by the rain getting somewhat warmer. However, as the time of the books approaches, Kovir's winters have started to get longer and come faster, which is part of a prophecy that I'm just not going to cover in this video. So let's rewind. Poviss and Kovir were once fiefdoms of Redania, called the Jewel in the Crown. The king of Redania at the time, 𝒕𝒽𝒃 I, had a brother named Troidan who was kinda a slime bucket that his brother the king really didn't like. He was afraid this guy was going to get older and more powerful and just cause all sorts of trouble in his kingdom. To get rid of his brother, the king sent him far north and bestowed on him the title of Count of Kovir. Now, depending on what translation of the books you get, instead of count, it can be governor, and so forth. The most commonly used one is count with the translations. It's just like with Triss's hair. She's a redhead, the author said she's a redhead, but translation to Polish to English got a bit muddy. So for this video, I'm using count. Despite being a vassal of Redania, they weren't required to pay tribute, nor were any oaths required. Also, they didn't have to send any of their men to serve in an army when Redania went to any type of war. Some say the king made it this way because he didn't want to embarrass his brother, knowing the count likely couldn't pay. But other people thought it was because the king just never wanted to deal with his brother again. After the king died, Kovir was still enforced as a vassal, but they didn't have to pay or provide any men for the army still. In fact, those of the House Troidan were told they were never allowed to visit 𝒕𝒽, the capital of Redania, for any national holidays, or in general. They just couldn't go to the capital of Redania. Redania also left the succession of the House Troidan, and so they continued being counts that called themselves Troidanians, all of whom claiming they came from a common ancestor who was Troidan. As Redania kept Kovir at arm's length, they only heard rumors via Cadwyn of the goings-on, whispers of wars and struggles, alliances with the Creighton, the Telgar, the Hengfors, the Maliors, and others were heard, but those of Redania didn't really understand or care to understand what was really going on. However, there were some that were intrigued by these rumors, and this led to people from all over, including Redania, traveling to Kovir in hopes of opportunities. And while this attracted all sorts of individuals, mostly it was thugs and criminals. This led to Kovir getting a pretty bad rap, with the common insults in Redania and Cadwyn being, "Don't use those Kovir manners here." And instead of going to hell, they said go to Kovir or Poviss. Anyone that disagreed with civil living was told, take the road to Kovir. Despite hearing of their many conflicts, Redania still chose to ignore Kovir. Kovir, conveniently, also chose to ignore Redania. After all, the only thing Kovir had was seawater and sand. Who really cared? However, that seawater and sand became a bit more when Kovir, strengthened through the wars and coming together with Poviss, monopolized the world's market on salt and glass. People all over the continent were soon salting their food with Kovir salts and drinking out of Kovir glasses. And the insults of "go to Kovir if you don't like the way things are" made those that didn't fit into typical society go, okay, sure, that's a great idea. This led to a second wave of migration to Kovir, but instead of thugs, they saw a wide range of professionals going north. Wizards who didn't like how the South used their magics, miners and geologists that wanted to dig into the hills and mountains of Kovir, farmers and ranchers that wanted to try their hand at living in the area, engineers that wanted to build machinery that the rest of the world just wasn't ready for. Scientists also had theories too outlandish to be tolerated by more civilized lower areas. Years later, and it turned out those people had the right idea, especially the geologists and miners. The mountains held vast amounts of precious resources, and soon Kovir was exporting iron ore, silver ore, nickel, lead, tin, zinc, copper, chrome, titanium, tungsten, platinum, and more. They dominated the world's gold extraction, supplying over 80% of the world's gold supply. Those that lived there soon earned 4 times more than those that lived in Rudania did. And as Kovir and Poviss grew, they were ready to trade with the rest of the continent on a much grander scale. But there was a snag. Rudania finally began to pay attention to Kovir. Under King 𝘊𝑚𝑒d III, the great-grandson of 𝘊𝑚𝑒d I, he decided it was time that Kovir paid tribute. After all, they were a vassal of Rudania. When Rudania got into a border conflict with Edirn over the Pontor Valley, 𝘊𝑚𝑒d III decided this was now the time to get what his kingdom was owed. He required a special tax for the war and made it so all his subjects and vassals had to pay. For the first time, this included Kovir. Sending a message to 𝑒ⴡ👏👏, the king waited for his Rudanian messengers to come back. Except the small village of 𝑒ⴡ👏👏 was now a huge capital of Kovir, and their count was now King 𝐺𝑒ℎ𝑗𝑎𝑣s. The king of Kovir let the messengers know that Kovir was nobody's vassal, and since Kovir has never paid tribute or supplied military before, nor was it ever invited to national celebrations, the claims Rudania had on Kovir were foundless. Kovir was an independent kingdom, and would remain that way. And 𝘊𝑚𝑒d III got the message and said, "Oh, okay, my mistake." No, he threw a total temper tantrum and decided to treat them like a hostile foreign kingdom. He enforced harsh custom taxes, and even tried to arrest Kovir merchant ships. This blew up in their face when 2 Kovir frigates appeared and set their Rudanian patrol boat on fire, killing everyone on board. 𝘊𝑚𝑒d III was beside himself with rage, and he took 4,000 of his men to cross the river Rawrist, and special forces from Cadwyn also moved in to attack Kovir. But a week later, only 2,000 Rudanians were left alive, and only remnants of the special forces from Cadwyn who had ran back home. See, 𝘊𝑚𝑒d III had not anticipated that Kovir had 25,000 mercenaries from all over the continent that were incredibly loyal to the Kovir crown, mostly because they paid very, very well, and for each victory, each risk they took, they got even more bonuses. And leading these mercenaries were commanders from Rudania and Cadwyn, who had retired early to go to Kovir and get super rich leading their armies. So that also added a lot of insult to the loss for Rudania and Cadwyn. 𝘊𝑚𝑒d III could have listened to his people and continued the war, but he swallowed his pride and negotiations were held in Lan Exeter. He was accompanied by King Benda of Cadwyn and a prelate of Novigrad. When sailing there, it was obvious how busy Kovir was. They saw endless shipyards and ships ready to rule the seas. So Kovir was absolutely ready if they decided to go to war with them over trade or in any way. Lan Exeter is a winter capital of Kovir, the capital being 𝑒ⴡ👏👏, and is absolutely amazing, by the way. This city is built on water in the river Tango with canals instead of streets. To even get into the capital, you have to arrive by ship to a landing stone pier and then get on a more slender ship that takes you into the city. The Grand Canal leads to the king's residence, the Palace of 𝑒ⴡ👏, and also many side canals. But to get to the monarch's residence, you have to sail past palaces, mansions, and an abundance of wealth that left the king of Rudania speechless. He had never seen such luxury and extravagance. Fun fact, in 𝐿𝑎𝑛 the wider your house is, the more you paid in taxes, and obviously the king's palace was the widest home. When they arrived at the palace, they were greeted by King 𝒿ℽ𝑗𝑚𝑖𝑑s and his wife, 𝒠̓ema. Another blow was delivered when the King 𝒿ℽ𝑗𝑚𝑖𝑑s greeted Radovid as uncle, and 𝒠̓ema, who had belonged to a people that had the blood of kings in their veins and had fled Cadwyn, greeted Benda as dear grandfather. So the signing of the first treaty happened, called the First Treaty of 𝐿𝑎𝑛, and it was declared in this treaty that the sea was free and open, trade was free and open, there was no obstructing trade or profit, and finally Kovir was nobody's vassal, but independent and neutral. The king and queen of Kovir did, however, allow the two kings to retain titles that included their territory until their death. 𝒿ℽ𝑗𝑚𝑖𝑑s and 𝒠̓ema ended up ruling for 25 years, and eventually the line of House Tróðan ended with his grandson Gerard. In House Tróðan's place, House 𝒿ℴ𝒽 came to the throne. The kings of Kovir mixed with those of the other kingdoms, and everyone minded the treaties of 𝐿𝑎𝑛. Not doing so would be a loss of a lot of resources, so of course they played ball, and they abided by the treaty. As for Kovir, it could have ruled the seas, but they chose to never interfere with their neighbors, never claim more land, never claim foreign heritage, never send ships of war, and they remained free and open. Kovir and Poviss are considered so neutral that even during the time of the books, they will not take sides, and despite Nilfgaard attacking the northern kingdoms, they stay on good relations with Nilfgaard. During the time of the tensions with the Nilfgaard, the king of Kovir will not support any aggressive action against Nilfgaard. They remain so neutral that people begin to flee to their kingdom instead of engage in war. Finally, let's end on some fun facts. There is a druid circle in Kovir that does take in those found in the gutter from time to time and educate them to be a druid. In the books, 𝒉𝑽𝑗𝑚𝑚 gets Geralt kicked out of Kovir. Geralt kills a monster that had been terrorizing the people, but 𝒉𝑽𝑗𝑚𝑚, believing that witchers killing magical creatures is abhorrent, convinced the king of Kovir to not only not pay Geralt, but give him 12 hours to get the hell out of Kovir. Also fun fact, Renfri tried to assassinate 𝒉𝑽𝑗𝑚𝑚 3 times in Kovir, but he honestly had it coming. Alright, thank you for watching the history and lore of Kovir and Poviss. Please like, subscribe, and come back for more Witcher lore. Ooh, and other sci-fi fantasy videos as well.